Hey, cool kids. Welcome back to the Cool Grandpa podcast. You might notice a little bit of a difference with my voice this week, and that's because I had the flu a couple of weeks ago and I had such a bad cough, it completely wiped out my vocal cords. And so I'm just getting my voice back. I wanted to get this conversation out to you. This week, we are talking with Kevin Hall, and Kevin is a fantastic grandpa and he's an amazing author. We are going to listen to his journey and his story about being both a grandpa and an author. Kevin is just a fantastic guy. You're going to really enjoy this conversation. And if you do me a favor, go over to the Cool Grandpa website, check out the bookstore, look at the hats, look at the coasters, look at some of the glasses, the t-shirts and stuff like that I've got. And make sure that if you haven't ordered something that you pick something up. It would help me out, helps out the show a little bit. And it's a great way just to make sure that people know that you either are a cool grandpa or that you have a cool grandpa in your life. Hey, without further ado, and before my voice gives out, let's get on with this conversation with Kevin. Kevin, thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa podcast. This is going to be a fun conversation.
I'm looking forward to it, Greg, and thank you very much for having me on your show.
I'd love for you to start us out by giving us a little bit of an introduction and taking us up to the point where maybe you started to become an author and a grandfather.
All righty, will do. I could be funny and say it all started in a log cabin in the woods, blah, 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 but no. Actually, I'll start you off when I got married, which I'm coming up on my 49th wedding anniversary.
Wow,
And my
congratulations.
wife and I were high school sweethearts. I was a senior, she was a junior, and I graduated. And unfortunately, her mom actually moved out of state and took the daughters with her. So after I had graduated, I decided to, go in for what my next line of study would be, which was going to be electrician. But after a couple of months of that, I said, I'm really missing my girlfriend at the time. So I was living in Minnesota and decided that's it. Got rid of everything and drove the car down to Illinois and been with my wife. We got married that April. She graduated high school early and we've been married ever since. And we had two children, a boy and a girl. And we've now got 6 beautiful grandkids ranging from 17 all the way down to the youngest will be 7 in about another 2 to 3 weeks. We just loved being grandparents. When the first grandchild came along, son and daughter-in-law came over to the house and they handed us a little, I want to say it was like an embroidery thing that said expecting October, and excuse me if I forget the date, but I mean, we were just shocked, but we were happy to beat the band. And then when the grandson was born, we just couldn't wait. We were pacing back and forth outside, waiting to get in there to hold our grandson. I mean, people say that there's certain things in life that they remember for the rest of their life. Well, let me tell you, having grandkids and being there and holding them, there is nothing better. And now, like I said, the oldest is 17 and the youngest 7. And the oldest just sat and took his SATs. And next year he'll be a senior and getting ready for college, visiting different colleges. And wow, how time has flown. So that's kind of been my journey. There's 3 grandsons and there's 3 granddaughters. And let me just tell you, it is a lot of fun when we have them. It's a lot of tiredness too. I mean, it can wear you out. We've got a couple of grandchildren that are very, very active. Now, all of them are homeschooled. And let me tell you, they can put us through their paces. There's no slouches there. They can hold us in conversation and say, well, what about this? And did you think about that? And blah, blah, blah. So it was actually because of them that I started writing and started my writing journey. But that came along after I had retired, and I retired after 40 plus years in corporate America. My last two jobs, was working for two different Fortune 500 companies, and that took up, probably 36, 37 years total. And the first day I was retired, I just wanted to relax, sit back. And that first Monday morning, I think I'm going to sleep in a little bit, So, but then, like I said, it was my grandkids that really got me started on my writing journey. And we used to have them over to the house quite a bit. And we live halfway in between the two different families. My daughter and son-in-law and their two girls are southeast of us, about a half an hour. And my son, daughter-in-law, and their four kids are to the northwest of us, about a half an hour. So we're right in the middle. So everything, all the holidays and birthdays and things like that, all the parties and get-togethers come to our place. We're halfway in between. So it makes it easy on both parts. But when we had the kids over, and we would have them over together, we would have them over individually for sleepovers. But when we did, a lot of times they'd sit and say, Grandpa, what were you like as a kid? What did you do? What did you play with? And we would tell them stories, both my wife and I would. Basically, we'd say, it took a while we were growing up before we even got a color television. We didn't have microwaves. We didn't have computers. We had one central phone in the house that hung on the wall in the kitchen. These kinds of things, and no handheld iPhones or anything like that. And so in telling them these stories, they'd always want to know more. And they'd say, Grandpa, what did you do then? And I said, well, we played kickball in the street. We played touch football. We played baseball in the street. And if a car came down, we'd yell out, car. And everybody had to move the bases out of the way so the car could come through. And then once the car left, bases went back. We resumed the game. And that's what we did. I rode my bike to the Little League games. My parents were always working, and a lot of times at that age, that time frame, I should say, that era, the parents didn't always go to the kids' activities. Whereas today, parents go to, it seems like every activity, and even us grandparents, we just went to my grandsons. Both of them are on basketball leagues, so we went to those and watched their games. But I would tell them these stories and tell them how, I'd walk the streets at 7, 8, 9 years old. And it was a small town, about 10,000 people at its max. But the Christmases were beautiful. The lights stretched across the street. The stores, we had a W.T. Grant store, National Auto Store. We even had a local mom and pop pet shop where they had a pet monkey inside. So we'd go in and we'd hang out there. And there was the Powers News, which would be similar, I guess, today to maybe the best I could come to it would be like a Starbucks and a cigar shop had a baby. That right. Would be the Powers News, because they had all kinds of newspapers all over. And if you were a cigar aficionado, they had the tobacco and the cigars and stuff like that. And people would go in there at the start of the day, grab a cup of coffee, grab a newspaper. How you doing, Joe? Pretty good, Sam, that kind of thing. And this was small town America. And unfortunately, at the age of, I want to say it was 13, close to 14, my dad's job was transferred from that place out to Minnesota. And the good news is, when we went there and I graduated from Minnesota, that's where I met my wife. And that's really what began this beautiful journey. And like I said, April 3rd, 49 years. So we've just been enjoying it. So after I would tell the kids the stories, I got to thinking, all right, will they remember these? So then I started to, I say write it down, but it was on the PC. And so I'm recording it on the PC and writing it. And it's just my wife. We're empty nesters. So I had it at the kitchen table. And I'd be click-clacking away. And finally, one day I stopped. I turned the computer around to her. And I said, honey, I want you to read what I've been writing. And she read it. And it really was the first short story. I'm not kidding you. Tears were in her eyes. And so we decided that year we would take that go to a little printer, make a book out of it, and give it to the kids at Christmas. So the oldest, who really was the instigator behind asking me a lot of these questions, his name's Caleb. And at Christmas time, I sit back in my easy chair. I have my Santa hat on. I'm playing the big bearded Santa Claus, having a lot of fun. And all the presents were given out. And I said, Caleb, come here. So he came up. I said, you've asked me a lot about, what Grandpa was like as a kid and what did I do. I want you to open this. And what we did was we took one of the books and we wrapped it. And so I handed it to him. And when he opened it up, the look on his face, I mean, that was worth everything to me. So that was the first book, called My Christmas in Rosemont. And it was just a short story, but it really kind of set the stage. And I said, all right, after seeing those expressions, and I handed it out to the rest of the family, each member got their own copy. And let me tell you, we got pictures of everyone holding up the book and having fun at Christmas. I decided then to start writing my first book, and that was about my time growing up in Ilion, New York. And that was that small town I was referring to. And that became my first book. It is a memoir history book and has probably 80 pictures of the time back then in it. And I did a lot of that research online. Plus, I had pictures of my own from when we were a kid. And I put that and all the stories together in the book, got that printed. And then that led to my second book about my teenage years in Minnesota. And that I published that again, memoir history. And then my writing took a turn. And what that was is it left memoir history and got into spiritual.
Okay.
And I felt almost like I was being brought in to do that. And people who know me know I'm not an extremely religious person from the standpoint of going to church and all that. I am a strong believer, and I have no fear when we go where I'm going. I don't want to go anytime soon, but I have no fear when that time comes about. But that book has so many stories in it, and we can get into that more later on. But what was the catalyst there is my very best friend from high school, him and his wife, and unfortunately she's passed on to cancer since, but they were up visiting us, and we had an incident happen right in front of them where there was no denying that this is extraordinary. Something has happened here. And so that kind of put the spark into me to actually write the book. And I went out and I interviewed a lot of folks who were in the Twin Towers on 9/11 while the buildings were collapsing, and their miraculous way they got out of the buildings. Folks that, him and his family were in an airplane and it was a chartered flight taking them back home, and the pilot dies 10 minutes into the flight.
Ooh.
He has to take over now and land this plane. And so many more stories, and some of my own stories are in there that, the book I titled Signs, The Veil is Thinner Than We Imagine. And it has all these stories. And let me tell you, Greg, to me, reading it, and I sometimes refer to the book as a primer for folks who may say, I don't know. Well, read this and see what you think, how you feel about it, and all the different ways that you can receive these messages. And since that book's been published, I've gotten a lot of folks that have sent me emails, or even I've talked with them on the phone that said, oh, look, I had this story and I didn't know if people would believe me, and this kind of thing. So these were the books, and now I'm writing a fourth and a fifth book. The fourth is different yet, and so will the fifth be. The fifth will be, I think they call it history fiction, where
Okay.
it's true history, but mixed with fiction. And that's going to be the fifth book most likely. It's in timeout right now. I'll just put it that way. But the fourth book is one to help other authors, because I receive sales every month from the time the first book was published and I haven't spent really anything on advertising. No Amazon ads, no Facebook or LinkedIn ads, etc. There was another author and we did spend a little bit of money. I think it was maybe $60, $70 each to take out a half page ad back in one of our local newspapers back in our hometown of Ilion. And that's been it. Other than that, every month, and the books were first launched in 2022.
Okay.
And so this next book that I'm working on actually goes into how I've done that. And here's some tips for other authors. And I've got a lot of different titles floating around, the Cheapskate's Guide to Book Marketing and stuff
Oh,
like
sure,
that.
sure.
So I'm kind of thinking through how I want to do that. So I hope to get that book out later this year. And, I've just been having a lot of fun writing. So I know I've been doing a lot of talking, Greg, but it's kind of
No,
your
it's
prompting that brought me up
yeah,
to that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's been great. I think, one of the things that is interesting, especially when I have grandfathers on that are doing writings, whether it's memoirs or something else, it's a little bit of that walking a line. And maybe you experienced, maybe you didn't, of what do you tell the grandkids and what are stories that are left best for the kitchen table that aren't written down for them. So didn't know if you had any fun memories of that, because I've got ones where it's like I think I start to tell a story and the wife gives me a little elbow and it's like, the grandkids don't need to know about that one right now.
Yeah. There's a few of those stories. Yeah, for me, it's not necessarily an elbow; it's a little kick under the table, but it's the same thing. But yeah, there's certain stories that when they're of the right age, then
Right.
we can tell them. Because when they range from 17 to 7, there's just a few things you got to state it when it's appropriate for their
Sure.
age.
Sure, absolutely. I was, recent blog article I was writing a little bit about, granddad knows what firecrackers and rotten apples are for. And it's like the grandsons aren't quite old enough yet to get into that kind of mischief.
Yep. And my mom used to tell a story when we were definitely older about how, and she grew up on a farm. And you got to imagine she was born in 1927. So you go back before the era of any kind of thing that was PC or anything along those lines. And so she would say sometimes they'd take a firecracker and shove it up the frog's butt and wait and see what happens. You know, I'm thinking, whoa, there's no way I'm going to tell my grandkids that
Right.
story yet. It's going
Yeah.
to be a while.
Exactly, exactly. Now, I do want to know too, want to back up just a little bit because you've talked about this some, but when those grandkids started coming, I
Mhm.
think you had decided had you decided to retire before they started coming, or was it the
It
grandkids
was
came and
it was well after, Greg, well after. I've been retired now for 7 years. I
okay.
think it's 7 years. So yeah, it was after they were here, after a number of them were here.
Oh, sure, sure. And are you starting with Caleb being older? Are you able to start to transition that role a little bit into that mentor and that coaching phase that sometimes grandfathers get to?
I think so, but I think I've been doing some of that all along. With Caleb, he's always been, in my opinion, more mature. And it reminds me of It's a Wonderful Life, Jimmy Stewart, and the dad sitting down with him said, "You were just born older." That's
Right.
kind of the way I feel about Caleb because he was a little bigger at birth and that kind of thing, but he's always carried himself very well. And not to say the other kids don't. They definitely do. All of them are very, I would say, very much, well, sometimes headstrong gets a negative connotation, but they have a very good head on their shoulders.
Sure.
They're very well spoken for their age and very smart. I mean, they put me through my paces at times with some of the things they come up with and saying, whoa, that kind of response. But I'd like to think I've been able to help mentor him along. And when they were younger, we used to play chess quite a bit. And he'd ask some questions, as the other kids would, and I'd respond as open as I thought appropriate for their age and mindset. So I've never really tried to hold anything back from them.
That's great. When I've interviewed adult grandchildren, I think that's one of the things that they really appreciated when they've had good relationships with their grandfathers was grandfathers talking to them about life experience, maybe even business and stock market. If that's what the grandson or granddaughter was into, was getting some of that advice as they were getting older and just being able to have that sounding board that's different from mom and dad because they
Mm-hmm.
already know what mom and dad are going to say. I think sometimes grandparents might be a little bit of a wild card um, in terms of just not anticipating what those reactions are going to be.
I think that just comes with age where we realize that, make the most of your life. And to do that, you have to have the knowledge, you have to have the information. And I'm going to give you everything I know, as much as I possibly can, because if any inkling of that helps you out, then I'm going to be extremely pleased. But then that's kind of my legacy too that I'm passing on. So, as much wisdom as I can give to them, I'm all for that. Be it if we want to talk financial, if we want to talk anything. I mean, if you've got any questions, I'll answer them as openly as I can.
That's great. Question I want to jump over into the writing is that with the amount of time that you spent in the corporate world, and I've been spending my time there as well, how easy was it for you to transition your communication style? Because one of the things that you call out is you've got a very conversational, very easy conversation style in your writings, but that's not always how we're expected to communicate within the business sphere.
Yeah, I all my life I have been accused of writing the way I talk. And when I was in corporate America, especially the last 18 years, I had written a number of white papers. And my editors, if you have a book, you send them to an editor.
Right.
My editors was the marketing department, the management, etc. And the first round it always come back, change this, change this, change this, because I my whole thing is let me get all my thoughts down and let's now sit back. We got we can rearrange it and change this paragraph, move this over here, et cetera, all we want. But if we start with a blank paper, it's not going to get us anywhere. We've got to have something down. And I've kind of also been, I don't want to say accused of, but I kind of live the 80-20 principle. It doesn't have to be perfect because guess what? You're never going to be perfect. And what some person may think, oh, that's pretty darn good, another person may think is crap. I just want to get it down and then we can wordsmith it to death for as long as, the ones who have final say so. But at least I'm doing my part. And I think that's one of the big problems in corporate America is too often we were schooled to, no, not good enough, go back and do it. No, not good enough, go back and do it. Well, guess what? Let's work together now and let's get it out the door. And if you keep spinning and going around, there was the old saying, analysis paralysis. And I saw that happen many, many times. I was in the tech field and I saw that happen so often. You know, get something out the door, guys. That's what we're being paid for. Produce, not being paid to sit around and describe, okay, we've got to save these files in a repository. What do we want to call them? Who cares? That's not getting the job done and out the door, as long as we know and we know which file to go get. That's all that matters. So that was my belief. And transition to my writing, therefore, it really wasn't a hard transition for me.
Okay. Okay.
It's just that now I became the boss
Right.
as long as my wife agreed.
I love it. Yeah, I was asking the question because as I've started doing some writing, find myself sometimes, the wife reads the drafts first. Is sometimes it's like this is too much corporate speak. This is
Yeah,
too
yeah,
much where, I've spent half a day or a day working over 5 PowerPoint slides to get
yep.
things just right for the monthly update meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And, so some of that is, I guess, being untrained and being able to find my voice with what I'm doing.
I can see where that can become a little bit of a transition for sure. With my wife's, she's really my first editor. I will hand it off to her, and I call her Miss Comma because she's going through. No, you don't need this comma. Yeah, you want to put one over here, blah blah, all the way through it. Like I said, I write the way I talk. And if I take a pause when I'm talking, well, then I'm going to put a comma there. If I'm writing and there's a pause, okay, there, that goes a comma. No, you really don't need that comma there. So it's that kind of thing. But she's also very much in my camp and my cheerleader too, to push me along. And one of the things you'll find out as you write books, you're not done with the writing and posting it out there on websites like Amazon and, oh, what are some of the other ones?
I think like Goodreads and
Goodreads and Barnes and Noble was the other one I was trying to get off the top
sure.
of my head. You now got to market the heck out of it. So the other night, my wife and I sat down, and there's a software app called Publisher Rocket, and that allows you to look at books and find keywords. And that's important because keywords are what people use when they key in to try to find the books in the first place. So you want to put keywords in that are what people are actually searching on. And so we sat down and we went through our books, and now we've updated them, and they advise you to update them, every 6 months or so for these keywords and phrases because they do change. The lexicon is always evolving. So you want to do that because you have to be your own marketer writing a book. And I've sat on many conferences. They're live events, they call them these days, on YouTube and different places like that, Zoom, etc. And the very first thing they tell you a lot of times is, guess what, you're not just an author, you're now the CEO of your business. And you got to think about that. And this is even getting into traditional publishing, Simon and Schuster and places like that. Even those authors are finding they have to do a lot of their own marketing. And that becomes a difficult thing for a lot of people. And it is also an expense that many of them may not be anticipating after writing their book.
Oh,
So
sure.
it's just a type of thing that you need to be aware of when you get into writing books, that now you've got a longer journey ahead of you.
Right. Right. No, for sure. I think I'm a member down here at the Atlanta Writers Club, and one of the things that has been coming up quite a bit is they're looking for authors that already have a platform, that
Mm-hmm.
already have, blog subscribers, that already have whatever this is going on. Where it used to be, you find the agent, somebody likes your manuscript, they go show it around, and then the publishers spend some of that time with the marketing and everything else. They want that all done by the authors ahead of time almost.
Right. Yes. Yep. And the days of old are gone. And those days were, well, guess what? You published the book through one of those major publishing houses. They flew you all over on book tours, and they got you speaking engagements and things like that to promote the book. But it was on their dime. And nowadays, nope. You're paying for everything. And the reason that independent authors are really skyrocketing is the fact that if you're going to have to go wait a couple years for a major publishing house to produce your book in the first place, and then you still have to go market it, and guess what? You really don't have any control over a whole lot of it. Why not then just do it yourself? And that has resulted in, they say there's like 4 million books published in the US per year, and about 3 million of them are actually self-published authors. So I think you can really see that this has grown tremendously and it's not slowing down. And in fact, now the next big thing is obviously audiobooks, and they've been growing. Like my first two books don't lend themselves to that with all the pictures and graphs and charts and stuff in it. It's hard to really describe some of that through an audiobook, but the science book, I am definitely thinking of making that into an audiobook. That I think would be a good one. So, yeah, it's a
Yeah,
lot of work, but it is a lot of fun too.
it is. And I wanted to ask you too what the sales for the first two books here, at least in North Georgia, and I think probably most states and areas have these things. The counties tend to have their historical societies.
Yes,
And I wonder if you had tapped into some of those for your, promoting your books.
absolutely have. And in fact, back in my hometown, the hometown doesn't have a historical society, but the county does. And the county is Herkimer County. And so I've actually been to the Herkimer County Historical Society, did a book signing event there, sold my books. They have a gift shop, sold my books through them since they first were launched. Now, it's a little bit different than the historical societies in Minnesota. They have a lot of small town ones that don't have gift shops. So what I do there is I at least reference them when I do any of my online postings, etc. And there's websites that they have followers of, and I can go on and place a posting there. So there's those kinds of activities. And there's another avenue, Greg, that a lot of people forget about, and that's their alumni associations
Okay.
and through the college. And let me tell you, I've been written up now 3 times in my college alumni newsletter. And one of the times I had no clue it was even going to be a posting in there. I just got the alumni newsletter and there's a posting. So it pays to get in contact with these people. And the good news from a cheapskate perspective, it's all free. It's just my time. So there, we're even looking at a book signing event at the college, but there's also even more avenues. The local library, my hometown library. My first book became the #1 checked out book for all of 2022, and it didn't even get into the library until May of that year.
Oh, wow.
And that's how, I mean, when I heard that, and this was the first week in January of 23, I'm getting the email and stating that the Mid York library system, of which my hometown library is a member of, has posted my book as the #1 book checked out of the Ilion Library for all of 2022. Talk about being humbled. Forget all the sales. To me, that was the highest honor I could receive right there, that they really enjoyed it that much that it got checked out those many times. So don't forget your hometown libraries, your high schools. Go to your high school and talk to them, give them a copy. They got libraries, and
Yeah.
this is one of their own. When I wrote my second book, there was a posting by one of the high school alum. Now, she wasn't in my grade, but she posted, here, I just picked up this book. It's written by one of our very own. Wow. It's that kind of thing, that kind of joy that you can get out of it. Yeah, you're not getting a royalty or anything for this. And in fact, you're probably buying the book and paying the postage to send it to them. But just that feeling that it's there and this is your alma mater. I'm going back to my 50th high school reunion this September. I'm
Wow.
going to have a whole lot of fun out there. To know that your book's there and that you've left this, it's a legacy.
Right.
That's all I can say. My parents were buried in a grave. I most likely will be cremated and won't have a grave site. So where will the kids go and the grandkids to really sit down and reminisce? They got the book. You know, Sit in front of a campfire or wintertime, a fire in the fireplace, crack open a nice drink, and just sit back and tell stories about grandpa. To me, that is the greatest gift.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I was going to ask you too is what advice do you have for grandparents that have thought about maybe I write something down, maybe I don't? And what's some of your advice for them to get maybe started on this?
There's a few things. One piece of advice that was given to me long ago is the best way to write is to sit your butt down in a chair and do it. And I state that I know how hard it is. There was a survey done many, many, many years ago, and they asked the group of people, how many of you want to write a book? 80% of them came back and said they wanted to write a book. How many actually were writing a book? Less than 1%,
Mm.
0.8%. And you hear that number being touted all over. I will tell you, I did the research into that. It was a small company out of Michigan that first did that survey. And this is going way back. I want to say it was in the 40s that they did. It might have been the 60s, but they wanted to get a handle on it. My advice, definitely, if you don't want to write the book, jot down the notes. We all got PCs. It doesn't take much to type it in, and it doesn't have to be formatted. Just, put a little title onto the page on it and just type the stories in to leave it for the kids. If you didn't want to write, the other thing to do, grab your cell phone and make a video and leave the video, but leave something for them. I also like a little bit of sci-fi too. And the things that I see in the future are not so sci-fi-ish as more reality-ish. And that is you're going to see a little, if it's not an avatar of yourself, it'll be a image of yourself in 3D, and it'll be able to speak in your voice and tell your stories. So the kids could gather around, put it on the main screen in the house, and just sit back and hear parents, grandparents tell stories. And so they'll always be with them, and you'd be able to hand them down, etc. So to me, that's the legacy that I see going forward. And I'm doing it through hard paper books, but who knows what the future for a lot of these people who want to write, what avenue they may take.
Oh, sure. And I like that idea of even just getting the stories down and
Yes.
keeping, because I think too it gets overwhelming if it's, oh, I've got to write a memoir or I've got to write my whole life story. Well, when you're 60 something years old, that's a lot. And so,
Yes.
but if you tell the story of your aunt giving you money to go buy cigarettes down at the corner store when you're 7 years old, that was 3 or 4 blocks away.
Yep.
That's an interesting little story that you can do on a couple of pages.
Oh, absolutely. And my dad was a smoker. And that wouldn't be beyond him. We had a small town store, Frank's Supermarket. If we went down with a note from our parents, if he didn't believe you, he would call the parents. But most of the time, he would just say, "Okay, yep." And he would give us what was written on the note, and it could be cigarettes there. It could be almost anything,
Right.
a 6 pack of beer, whatever, because they didn't have the stringent laws like we do today. And we would just take that home. And that was the way that, the kids parent relationship then, kids did what their parents said. And there wasn't a whole lot of, but yeah, I got to go play. No, no, no. You're going to do this and you go do it. Then when you get back, we'll talk about what's next. And that's just the way life was then.
Right.
But I'll tell you, people ask me, would you go back there? You better believe I would. It was just so phenomenal. And a lot of folks that hopefully will listen to this may have heard of Ilion, New York before, but because of our PC type society today, it's not in a positive way. Ilion, New York is the birthplace of the Remington rifle.
Oh, okay.
And the factory existed with workers until our state government rode them out of town.
Yep.
And they closed up shop last year, and the remaining 300 people were without jobs. And the Remingtons are still being made. They're just being made in a whole nother state.
Yeah, I think they moved down to Tennessee, if I'm not
Yeah, I want to say that
something
sounds
like
right.
that.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, and I did spend a little bit of time up in on the Finger Lakes in Canandaigua.
Oh, sure. That's not far from where I live at all.
No, and those whole little industrial towns all over that part of New York were just spectacular. But
Oh,
yeah, and it's sad to see some of these things close up shop and move.
yeah, absolutely is, Greg. And you mentioned Canandaigua. My daughter and son-in-law are in Honey Eye, and that's just about 20 minutes away from Canandaigua. And the New York State, oh my Lord, New York State is a beautiful state. I mean, you got everything from the Adirondacks to the wine country and the Finger Lakes to Niagara Falls, New York City. I mean, there's just so much in this state. Unfortunately, a lot of people are leaving due to the political climate. And you know, I don't like to mince words. It's not easy at times to hold conversation on that thing. The other thing is New York State is a heavily taxed state, and a lot of people are leaving because of that. So, but it is a gorgeous state. I mean, it is beautiful. The four seasons, you know, there's just so much to do. If you're an outside person, you will not get bored at all.
Nope.
So I'm hoping it will return to the once great state that it was, but you know, time will tell in that regard.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, some of these things I think tend to be cyclical, but those cycles tend to be long
Yes.
as well. So, you know, it's kind of tough. Let me see. I think we've covered a lot of what we're looking for on this one. Kevin, is there anything that I haven't asked you about in terms of being a writer, in terms of being a grandfather that you'd like to bring up?
Well, the only other thing I can think of is there's different writing styles, Greg, and some people refer to it as being a pantser or a planner. There's actually a third style that I had was on a live podcast, and they quoted it as being a quilter. Now, a pantser is those who, as you can imagine the term, you're flying by the seat of your pants. You know, you don't really have, now the other side, a plan. Whereas the quilter kind of takes both of them and pieces of both of them and puts them together or quilts them together.
Sure.
So I tend to be in the middle. I plan in that I have an outline. There's other tools that I can bring to my disposal from my days working in the Fortune 500 companies that allow me to organize different thoughts and ideas in certain what they call affinity diagram modeling, or
Mhm.
just all that means is fancy term for this has likeness towards this, therefore let's group them together. So there's those things that I can do, and I tend to sit back and do them. But then as I'm starting to write, now that I know this, all right, now let me write. That's the Panzer side coming out. Um,
Right.
but the other thing I do with a lot of my books is I research a lot. And I'm just getting into utilizing tools to help with that. Chat GPT. I do not use it to write the book. There are programs out there. Grammarly is one, and there's more that you can deploy. But and they help you with the writing and pointing out different things. But some of them do use AI engines behind them. Now, it doesn't mean that AI is writing the book. It just means that it's helping you. Maybe it'll suggest you rephrase this a little bit differently. That's not them writing. They're taking your words and just kind of, you know, moving it around a little bit or smoothing them out or putting a proper tense to them, those sorts of things. I don't consider that AI writing the book. There are books that have been written entirely by AI. And I'll tell you, even from a number of the live events I've been on, they don't have that human touch. And that's so important. So my books are written by me, but I will use like ChatGPT to help me with the research to
Hmm.
say, all right, now I'm looking for this. What might you suggest? and show me the resource. So it'll come back and it'll show me the resource, and then I'll go over and look it up. That's not much different than going to a library saying, this is what I'm looking for. And then they take you, in the old days, they took you to the card catalog. But in the new days, they just punch it into the computer and give you back information, say, okay, that's over there.
Right.
That's not much different other than now I'm sitting back here. It's doing a lot of the driving. But when we reach the destination, I'm going to get out and do all the exploring.
Yeah.
So that's really on the forefront right now, but more and more tools are being developed all the time in AI. And AI is getting more and more sophisticated. It's still not human, but the last I was hearing, and I think it was maybe Musk that was saying this, I can't remember if it was Musk or Gates or one of them, were stating that within 6 years, AI will pass the intelligence of the most intelligent person.
Mm.
So it's going to be interesting what the future brings.
Yeah, it will be. And I think personally, I'm not a doom and gloom type when it comes to that, but I'm also kind of a what are the unintended consequences that are going to pop up, So, like you said, I'm excited for it. I do kind of miss those old days of going to the library, looking at the abstracts and doing that. But you're right. I mean, essentially that's what Chat GPT and some of these online tools is. They bring you up the business journal article abstracts, and you pick out which ones you want to dive into, use as a resource.
Exactly. I give advice to a lot of authors when it comes time, if you use AI tools, always, always, always double check the resource, because I can tell you from my own experience doing it. I'll give you a very quick example. I wanted to know if ChatGPT knew who Winston Churchill's grandparents were. Well, they came back and said all this kind of stuff, but didn't include one grandparent, which I happen to know about. And that's his grandmother. One of his grandmother's names was Clarissa Hall. I know that
Oh,
because it's in my genealogy. When I trace it back, we all go back to John Hall in the 1630s. Well, John Hall was pretty prolific and had a number of children, and my line came down this side. Well, we got another famous person, Lyman Hall, the signer of the Declaration. He's down this line. And then you got Winston Churchill with Clarissa Hall. She's down this line. I then had to go back and say, well, there's another grandparent, Clarissa Hall. And it came back and said, yeah, you're right. I mean, okay, it's obvious it didn't know, but
right.
I knew. And that's why I always recommend to those folks, check the resources.
Well, and that's funny. I think that's one of those bits of wisdoms that grandparents can pass on to grandkids, because as somebody that is volunteering and working in schools and with youth, a lot of times if it's on Wikipedia or something on the internet, they grab it and they run with it like fact. And to your point, sometimes that's wrong unless you double check.
Yes. Yes. No, and that's something that when you work in corporate America, especially when you're lining with the sales folks and with marketing and stuff like that, you learn very quickly. You have to check your facts, because if you don't, and you're in front of a group and you're giving a presentation, there's going to be somebody there that's going to call you on it.
Well, Kevin, this has been a blast. I've really enjoyed having you on the Cool Grandpa podcast. And I think, we're going to stay connected, because I'd love to continue this conversation down the road even.
Oh, Greg, I would love to. I love this part of the authoring business. And I've been on a podcast in about a month ago, South Africa. I've been in one in Australia, one in England, and a number of them here in the US. And I've just been having a ball doing it. And basically, like I told you in the beginning, I'm kind of an open book. Ask me anything, I'm going to tell you. I've got an opinion. I'm going to tell you why and give you the advice that you're seeking. And if you use it, great. If you don't, great too, because that's your choice.
Hey, Kevin, before we say goodbye, where can people find you? Where can they follow you and get connected?
Sure. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Reddit. I'm also got my website, kevin-hall.com. And you can find my books on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Goodreads. I've even found them. I did a search on walmart.com and target.com, and the books are over there. So they're distributed wide. I make this offer to anybody. If you want to get in touch with me, khall4 at AOL.com, go right ahead. And I usually get back to everybody. It depends. I mean, if they, send me a nasty gram, well, I may not respond. But no, everything's been really good and positive. And like I say, I hear a lot of folks' stories. And if I can help anybody out there, by all means, there's a lot of live events I go on to, and there are a lot of good people in the industry. Julie Broad at booklaunchers.com. You've got Dale Roberts at his site, and there's just so many more. Brian Cohen. I mean, you can go on and on. There's a lot of people who love giving the information out to the indie authors. And if I can help anybody, I'm more than willing to do so.
Oh, that's awesome. And I'll make sure to put those links and everything into the show notes as well. So, Kevin, thanks again for being on the Cool Grandpa podcast. This has certainly been a fun conversation.
Oh, I loved it, Greg, and looking forward to chatting with you again.